Welcome to our first meetup of 2026. It will be a great year. All right. I think there are still some people who are here for the first time and do not know me. So I'm Hetty Dombrovska. I work here in DRW. I'm a database architect and I'm doing exclusively Postgres. Also, I'm a founder and president of Prairie Postgres non-for-profit organization dedicated to Postgres education in the Midwest states of the United States. In addition, I'm the board member of the Linux Professional Institute and also the communications chair of the ACM Chicago chapter. The most important thing, so several people ask me, what are my New Year resolutions for 2026? So most important thing for me for 2026 is a PG Data conference, and we will talk about it in a bit. So again, for those who are here for the first time, we do not have guest Wi-Fi like everybody have login password. So if you need Wi-Fi, I always generate bunch of individual logins passwords for the day. So see me and grab the piece of paper. Unfortunately, it's like unpronounceable passwords, unpronounceable logins. So you'll need to type them in and I cannot send it to you electronically. So sorry. But it will be always available. You know, I do like at least 15 each time. All right. So what is going on in the world of Postgres? So we just finished 2025, there were lots of conferences, and there are lots of new events coming, even in the United States, because most time when I talk about events, all the events in Europe, and there are barely any in the US. So this time, actually, we will have PG Day Dallas in February. It's first time, first event there. Then we will have Scale, that is South California Linux Expo. So there will be all open source things, but also there will be day for Postgres. I will be there, but I will not be doing Postgres talk. I will be doing community talk there on Friday, something, if anybody curious. Then we'll have PG Data in Chicago in June. And first time this year, PG Day Boston. So it will be an event joined to PG Data. So we are June 4th, 5th, and they are Tuesday next week. So basically it's kind of, that's designed this way. So we're promoting the event together with ours. And call for proposals is still open. So for all others, a call for proposals is closed. For Boston is still open until the end of February. Also, there is a online conference, which is actually a very good event. And honestly, I like, you think what's the interest in online events these days when we have so many in-person events, it's very good online event. So if you like submitting anything, I really recommend you to follow up and join. And when they will be broadcasting the talks, please join. There are lots of cool talks there. All right, so that's what's in the world of Postgres. Now, about us. So we are Prairie Postgres, and I am inviting people to our Discord server. So we have channel for Illinois Prairie Postgres user group. If you are not there yet, please join Discord because I want to hear from you. So yesterday I posted a whole bunch of questions there for discussion, and some of them I'm listing here. So I really want to hear how you see our events, because we were running this for a very long time. Even before we were Prairie Postgres, we ran these events for many years. So is it like something you like how we run it? Do you want something new? Are there any speakers which I did not think about inviting, but you heard them and wanted to invite? Please tell us. So everything is in Discord, and please join and please tell me. Let's discuss. Do we want to have more than one talk? Again, previously we had more than one talk. Sometimes for the past 2 or 3 years, we're doing like one talk per meetup. Do we want to do more? Because there are lots of other meetups who are doing 2 or 3 talks when they meet. So do you think it's a good idea? I don't know. Should we have Q&A? So again, years ago, we had like a 10, 15 minutes Q&A, and Jerry, who is here in the front row, who knows everything about Postgres, was always answering the questions from audience. Then we kind of stopped doing this. Do you think we should resume this? Do you have like questions about Postgres? You want expert to answer? Do you want to have like rotating experts here? Again, share on Discord. Training sessions, again, number of people told me, oh, other meetups are doing like training sessions on Zoom, or like doing Sundays, like I don't know. Tell me whether it's something we might be interested. Usually when we get together here, we are talking about sort of advanced topics, not about basics, but maybe we should have time or venue where we talk about basics. Let us know, okay? And most importantly, I would love to hear from you. We have lots of amazing speakers, and I always like to invite great speakers, like Ryan, who will be talking today. But I also would love to hear from our community, because if you are doing Postgres at work, you are doing some cool stuff, right? So Steve, Paul, you know, like people who... Robert, like people who, yeah, people who come to these meetups and who are doing cool things in Postgres, who already presented. Please don't be shy. If you are not sure whether the topic is good, talk to me. But overall, I would love to hear. And if we want again to do like we did last year, kind of like short talks made in Chicago, we can do this. I'm very happy to have it. So let's discuss. Get in touch. All right. Prairie Postgres says non-for-profit. If you reside in Illinois, which you all are, since you are here, if you are not a voting member yet, please consider becoming. It's free. We do not have annual dues yet. Maybe we won't have it. I hope we can get without annual dues, but become voting member, because again, we want to hear from you. We want to hear how you want us to run organization. We are dedicated to Postgres users in Midwest, and you are Postgres users in Midwest. Tell us what you want us to do, how we can help you, okay? So please consider becoming it. Please consider volunteering for us. It's always something to do. And finally, PG data. Again, in case you did not hear it from me for the past many months, right? So PG data is coming June 4th, 5th in Loyola Water Tower campus. CFP just closed last week. So now our talk selection committee is working on selecting the talks. So I think that by February, they will have at least list of sessions, and hopefully by this time, we will also have a list of trainings which will be available. If you register for the conference, you can attend any of the training sessions for no extra cost. So you pay for the conference and you attend any of the sessions. Like space will be limited, I think, because we have like 50 people max in each of the class. But it's another thing which is worth attending. Again, we are now with super low introductory rates. So, okay. Oh. All right. What else we want? We are still looking for sponsors. We already have 3 gold sponsors, 2 bronze sponsors. We are looking for all sponsors levels. If you know like some organization who would be interested, please reach out, show them prospectus. Community partners, we have 2 community partners here. We would love to have more. We would love to have more academic partners. We have early bird tickets now available. Again, $20 for students, $30 for everybody else. So we still have them. Please register if you did not register yet. And we will talk more about this after Ryan's talk. So if you want to stick around, talk to me, ask me about anything related to PG data, I will be here. Okay, we have the space until 8:30 as usual. All right, and so now So Ryan told me, am I like January person? Like, yes, Ryan, you are January person. And actually my last LinkedIn post, I told everyone. So Ryan is a person who is not afraid to come to Chicago in winter and kind of, face our unpredictable weather. And we are very thankful for him because how many times, is it like your third time in January? Right? Third time. So no, big. Yeah. So whatever Ryan is telling us is always super cool. And now he's with PG Analyze, and PG Analyze is a super cool company. So yeah, big round of applause for Ryan. Okay. Thank you. And yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. I am out of here and all is yours.
Good evening.
You need to mic yourself.
I do.
Otherwise, you won't be on Zoom.
All right, everybody. I'm live and in charge. Here we go. Let me get this set. For some reason, it's so funny. My laptop, every time it is choosing to be not bright for me, and it's kind of annoying me here. All right.
All good.
Do you have Flux?
What's that?
Do you have Flux installed?
No, like, yes, I don't. It's not, I don't use Flux. I use a built-in yellowing, which may be affecting this actually. So let me turn that off. But no, it's just there's been dimming today, which has been interesting. And I don't know exactly what's going on with it. But is that, yeah, I think that this is being impacted by nightlight shift. Sorry, nightlight is, I'm going to turn you off. There we go. That looks a little better, doesn't it? All right. So yeah, thank you. Welcome. My name is Ryan Booz. I come from Pennsylvania. I come for a couple reasons. One, Hetty's phenomenal, and I just continue to just be really thankful for this group. It is, I say every time I'm here, this is the most active user group in the United States, which is amazing. And I keep hoping that other people will follow Hetty's example. So she's invested and she's doing great work. So I love that. And it happens to be one of the two places I can fly. In one, it's a destination for, like, from State College to here. It's quick and easy. So, if it was somewhere else, maybe not as easy, but I'm thankful to be here. So yes, the last couple of times I've been here, I've been with a company called Redgate, which again, Redgate's a great company. Really loved my time there. They have a lot of good tools. They have monitoring tools as well. But circumstances in our industry and being what they are, there's a really neat opportunity to go to PG Analyze. And I really have always been thrilled and interested about what PG Analyze is doing, being a Postgres only focused company that's also investing in the open source side of Postgres. And so the founder, Lucas, and his team has been at this actually for almost 15 years. I didn't actually fully understand the history until I started there. As a full-blown, this is all we're doing company, they've been in for, before the pandemic, probably 2019, something like that. But we actually have clients like Notion and others who are widely known as our clients who have been using our software for more than 10 years for doing monitoring and query optimization and stuff. It's like, oh, I had actually no idea about that. So it's kind of cool. So when Hetty asked, is like, okay, coming into 2026, I have not been speaking as much for some personal reasons. And I kind of want to get some new talks going. And I've been helping a bunch of customers get set up. And one of my passions is people that are coming to Postgres. And a lot of that is people that are coming from SQL Server, because that's my former life. And I know a lot of the problems and the frustrations. And so as I've been helping customers, I've been shocked again at how the one goal we all seem to have is we want to find the most problematic queries to tune our databases and make everything faster. And I continue to just be shocked, mostly, and sad for people who it's still challenging in Postgres. It's still actually really challenging to set this thing up well. And you have to know your database load and workload to actually do it pretty effectively and find what you need to do. And so we are doing some things within PG Analyze that kind of is a culmination of where this goes. This is the first time I'm giving this talk. 3 times from now, it will probably be a very different talk. But so what I want to talk about is logging with purpose. And what it really ultimately comes down to is the plethora of settings and things that I'm seeing in a lot of how customers are thinking they need to set up Postgres. And this is anywhere. This is not your local or bare metal. This is RDS. This is Azure. All of these places, you still need to care about 90% of these, even in hosted environments. And if you want to find those queries, you have to think this through. And so the goal of this is, over the next 45 minutes or a little bit less, I'm going to talk about these settings. I'm going to show you a couple examples of some queries that we are actually then working to identify within PG Analyze, because we just find that these come up pretty consistently. And there are well-known ways to at least try and have a positive effect on that query moving forward, right? By rewriting it or doing something else. And so I want to show you a couple of those examples. Once you have logging set up well and you're getting the stuff you need, now how can you find those queries and do something about it? So that's the goal. We'll see where we get to. All right. Very quickly, I do have one plug. So I gave this talk. It was a lightning talk in New York a couple months ago. I do lots of demos. I've probably used this here before. I've been a time series guy. I'm guessing most of you in your databases and in your development experience, you're working with time series data, right? It's events that are happening and you need to get something happen in the last hour, the last day, the last month. You're doing those kinds of aggregations. And it's really hard. Oh, interesting. Oh, I see. So this is how this is going to work. All right, here's what I need to do. Now is it going to? It is. Okay, there we go. So I had created a database a couple years ago. I call it Blue Box. Again, Red Box is now a non-issue in the United States, like everything else. Who uses physical anything? But at the time, there was this Pagila database that still exists, and it's very not great, right? It's no one's fault. It just has 1,000 things or whatever. Thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could actually use real films and have a database that could create data that looked like, as somewhat realistic data that was more in the holidays and, actually had geolocation and you could follow customers around the various rental stores and da-da-da-da. And so that's what this is. And I actually just spent, I said this last night, and there's been 3 or 4 things I really wanted to do. And I have not had time to work with Claude. And so over the last couple of days, I've been working with Claude in Postgres through an MCP server. And all these ideas I've been having, it's been really cool to have this side, person sitting beside me, quote unquote, having this conversation about, I'd really love to see this in this example database. Oh, let's talk about how to do so. So there's a new version coming, but if you need a sample database, some of the samples I'll show you tonight come from this. It's open source, freely available. You can just go to GitHub and look at it. And again, by Friday, there's going to be a new schema with a whole bunch of new things I've been working on with Claude. And like I said, I was having the conversation earlier about AI. At least 50% of the scripts that it helped me generate, I still had to fix numerous really stupid issues. But you still have to know, right? You still have to know, but I'm a really fast editor, right? So that's the thing. I was like, I'm glad I didn't have to. It was good to get this starting point and then see that's obviously not going to work well. Some cases, it gave me good examples for tuning. So that's what that is. All right, so here's where I am. I should have put this up here a long time ago. At Ryan Booz, just about everywhere. And there's actually some new content coming out here pretty soon. So hopefully 2026, you'll see more stuff coming. So really another configuration talk. I feel like these are pretty consistent. Again, my hope is that this comes from I'm having this experience over the last 6 months with customers who are using a monitoring software, which all of us at some point generally want to use, whether it's Datadog, whether it's Redgate, whether it's PG Analyze, whatever that might be. It could be PG Watch, it could be PG Dash, all of them. This matters and so consistently misunderstood how to apply some of these things, right? And so learning how to do some of this stuff is still surprisingly hard. I just did a query in a Postgres 18 install. Now, again, this depends on the extensions you have installed and some other stuff, but in kind of roundish numbers, a pretty basic Postgres 18 install, if you select from PG settings, and not all of them are settable, there's a lot of settings. I don't care if it's 100 or 400. There's a lot of settings you can tune in Postgres.
That's an improvement. It was 300 something last time.
It was 300, and it was 340 something, yeah. So now I will admit in this one, I realized after I did this query, I was like, oh, I do think this has two extensions in my, I tried to keep my extensions low, but I think this might have two. This probably has PostgreSQL, and I didn't look at that. So there's probably a handful of settings in there, but yes, there's a lot, right? So we need to learn how to do that and how to actually tune this stuff. I see teams consistently really struggle to understand, how do we find these queries? Time and again, our servers are just like crawling to a halt, and we're so reactive, and it gets really hard to be proactive. And that's ultimately what we want to do. And usually what I'm now seeing, in fact, really, it was so funny. This came out of a conversation I had with a customer I've had for a couple of years, and they're finally making the move. I logged in with them to do some setup, and I started looking at their settings. I was like, whoa, you guys amp this to 11 plus. Like, they made everything, log everything in the entire world, and let's run, let's run vacuum every 10 seconds. I was like, what is going on here? Like, hold on, right? So too little signal or too much noise, right? And then what I keep hearing over and over again is, well, does it really matter? Like, we have dbTune, and whatever's going to come out of the old auto-tune and whatever they're trying to do now, what is it called? We'll do it for you, or you don't have to think. I forget what the acronym is. But the reality is, again, it's very load dependent, and they don't know your data, right? Even AI has to learn the patterns, has to understand, and it's really hard to predict when it's simply a data issue and not an application environment issue, right? You know your client base, you know how your app has reacted, you understand the scope and the scale, and that all can factor into giving you some really good value to start with. So here's the goal, right? We're going to talk about too little, too much, and then a couple extra things. I'm going to give you some ideas, and I honestly would love some feedback, because this is like, hey, first time I give them the talk. And so whether we talk about it afterwards or you want to raise your hand, that's cool. For those of you at home, thank you for watching. Contact me later and we'll go for it. And then, like I said, I'll give you a couple examples at the end of, once you can find these queries, once you have this honed in a little bit better, there are a couple patterns even you could start to try and identify, and let's pull those out and actually start to do something with them. So it's not just whack-a-mole all the time, right? All right. I don't know why when I was doing slide signal and the noise, I love statistics, even though I'm not, and I never could be a statistician. I just think it's always been fascinating to me. And this is one of the most accessible books over the last many years I've read on statistics from a layman's perspective. Whatever you do or don't think it's over political, I don't care. It's just a really cool book. I happen to live in State College, which is where AccuWeather is. And one of the chapters in here is about weather, and how that is the one thing that has improved the most when it comes to predictability because of the modeling and so forth. It's actually really cool. Anyway, neat book. I really enjoyed it. Okay. So problem number one, under instrumentation. There are lots of settings we could talk about, but again, what I'm trying to talk about are things that are going to help you get logged query information that's going to be actionable, right? Not just everything. I'm not talking about things like query plans and, random page costs and things like that. Those are all valuable to discuss. That's a different conversation. But when it comes to something's going on, why can't I find the query that I need? These are the things I see pretty consistently, something. And a couple of these are like, do they really matter? They may or may not. But one of them, for instance, like the track activity query size, there are some monitoring tools. pgAnalyze is not one of them, but there are a couple well-known. I'm not going to name names. It doesn't matter. But they actually only get the query text from pgstat activity. They never actually query pgstat statements for the full query text. And so if your pg track, there's a slide for this. So someone might say, like, why in the world are you talking about that setting? I've never even heard about it. I would normally not care, except now I'm finding that there are some monitoring solutions that it actually matters, because it makes it hard for you to find the query. So you might need to worry about that. So we're going to work through these, but these are some of the things I see. I see people that take logmin error statement, and they set it really high because something happened at one point in their application, and they got all these error logs like, and so they just set it high, and then they never went back and did anything about it. And now they're not getting any errors. They can't log anything, right? And I asked, like, why is this such a panic? We don't remember. Okay, good. Logmin duration statement. And I always get this backwards because I think I mistyped this here. I think it's actually log statement duration. But anyway, logmin statement duration, which is really easy to do in Postgres. There's so many of these things. They're so long. Like, wait, is that statement duration statement? Anyway, I'm shocked how often I see people have this turned off, right? This is one of the easiest ways, even if you have no monitoring software, it is one of the easiest ways to find queries that are just running slowly, whatever that means to you, right? It just says, hey, if it's longer than this, log the query text. And that's really easy to look at in logs. PGStat statements is not enabled. I'm still shocked how often people don't understand. It's no one's fault. This is not anyone's bad. Well, I'm using RDS. I'm using Azure. Isn't it just working? No, it's not. You actually still have to go set it up. It's crazy that you have to, but you have to go set it up. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, okay. Auto explain, same deal. Track IO timing, not enabled. A few times I'll say things like your mileage may vary. I personally, in most situations, I don't have a problem with track IO timing. I think the overhead generally does not impact most people. There are some workloads that I can appreciate it will have that overhead. So we're gonna have to talk about it. Question? Oh, okay, great. All right, we'll get to all these in a minute. So that to me this is where I see problems with under instrumentation. And again, this is kind of a weird outlier, that last one, just because I have recently come across this with some monitoring solutions. And it's not, you don't know it until all of a sudden you need to find something like, I can't find this query. Why can't I find? We only have half the text of it, something like that. And then the problem is over instrumentation when it comes to queries. So again, there are times where I will see log statement all, which literally does what it says, like everything. That's really expensive from a logging perspective, right? Logs are actually pretty expensive in your costs, right? They take a lot of whatever hosting provider you're using. To parse those, to do something with them, the more storage you take, the more expensive it becomes. There's rarely value, but there are a couple times you might want to use log statement with one of the other settings. Log min duration being really min statement duration being really low. PGStat statements max being really high. And again, we'll talk about that in just a second. Auto explain min duration being, again, really, really low, thinking, well, I want all my queries to be 10 milliseconds or slower or faster. So I'm just going to log everything that's over 10 milliseconds. And the reality is you might never get that. Like, you're going to find that your good floor is 100 milliseconds and you should be really happy with that, right? And most people are still going to be really happy with that. Anyway, log duration, again, a lot of people might turn this on. Every single statement, you're going to get a log of like, whatever, who cares? And sorry, there's no underscore here. It's actually just PG capital A audit, but PG audit is being used more and more. Again, something I'm seeing. And one of the problems is it's a compliance thing, right? I know a number of you are in medical, financial, and numbers like, we need to know everybody that's touched every table and what they've done and what have you. Well, there are ways to tune that so that you're actually logging what you need to, not just log everything. PG audit is very verbose because it's giving you a lot of really good information. But if you just turn it on, it becomes a pile of stuff that you either have to figure out how to get through. And there's no really good, there are not many good tools right now that I know of that actually can crank through PG audit stuff and do really, really effective things. There's some good scripts people have written, don't get me wrong. But if you're using monitoring, it doesn't matter whether it's a provider like Amazon or Azure or what have you. Even a lot of monitoring solutions like PG Analyze right now, we are not specifically parsing PG audit stuff, something we're talking about. So there are ways to deal with that. And so ultimately, whether you're under logging things that you should be, like errors, or you're over logging, you're getting everything, every statement that's slower than 10 milliseconds, or slower than 10 milliseconds. Wow, my brain just did that. You don't know, right? Like, you can't find what you need to find. And you're really losing the signal for the noise, right? There's either so much noise or there's so little signal, you just can't understand what to start with. And I know that Hetty, she actually has a book about, slow and fast queries and how do you identify what that looks like and how do you interpret and think about those things, right? And so we need to figure that out. So this is all about finding queries that are worth fixing, and not every slow query matters, right? Again, I see so many times where people log in, they'll finally get this information and be like, look at all these queries that are taking 3 minutes. I said it ran once in the last 24 hours. Like, is that really what you need to care about right now? What about the one that ran 10,000 times and took a second? That's a lot of work right there. Maybe we should focus on that one first, huh? And so finding the queries that really matter is what this is about. So what I'd like to do is go through each of these with a little bit of discussion, and then give you a couple of these examples. If there's any questions and debate along the way, I'm happy to have that. I love understanding what your experience has been. And like I said, that will make this even better. So starting with log min error statement. And also preface this by saying what I did earlier. All of these, 90% of these need to be looked at even if you're in a hosted environment like Aurora, all right? You have the power to turn some of these things on and off when it comes to logging. And if you don't, you're going to be in a bind when you actually need to use it and do something with it. So, all right, as I said, often I see this turned up when I'm working with customers. When I say turned up, right, like they have basically raised the level. And so what this does is say, hey, any error level at this error level or above gets logged. Well, if I set it to the highest error level of panic, then nothing gets logged, right? Nothing ever gets there. Errors are good to know about. They matter, right? And so if you don't have that turned on, there's really no other way that you're going to find these. Errored statements don't get logged through something like pgstat statements or otherwise, because that only logs statements that run to completion, not things that have some kind of error. And so you do need to have error logging turned on. And if you don't, then you end up this, why is this query failing? And you go to logs and say, what are you talking about? I don't see any failed logs. I don't see any failed errors. So in general, just make sure that you have some way to identify these things and say, hey, did we accidentally turn it up to something else? Let's at least set it back to error, maybe debug. I doubt it, but it depends on what you do. Because again, in Postgres, we can also emit these error messages and we can assign a level to them. And so hopefully you're using that effectively with debugging and so forth, so that what you're actually getting out and what you're actually logging is really application errors, right? So they are meaningful. Log min duration statement. Again, I think I messed up the order earlier, and that's just bad memory as I typed this stuff out and I didn't go check it. But log min duration statement, often I see it underlogged by simply being off, right? They just aren't doing anything. Now, the debate here could be, well, I'm using something else like auto-explain. And you're absolutely right. That's a valid argument. Well, if I have auto-explain, why do I need this too? And I think it depends. I will often tell customers, you often want to, I hear you talk, and you often want to tune things that are above a threshold of a couple hundred milliseconds maybe. You believe or you've seen that your application generally is at this threshold, and so there's something there. But maybe you want to just be able to quickly see it's a different kind of log message. So you want to be able to see the things that take a second or 5 seconds or 10 seconds that just are, you just want to be really clear about what those are. And, or even the other way, maybe you want to only tune the things, you only want to explain plans when it's a second or 2 or 3 seconds, but you want to know queries that are taking 500 milliseconds, because if they're happening a lot, then there's something to deal with. And so, when you don't have a good tool for examining something like pgstat statements, this is a really good way to find those queries that are happening. Give and take, I think it depends on what your ability is to look at the logs and parse those logs and the tooling that you're using. There's a way to use these together. Now, in both cases, you can determine how often, or the sampling rate of these, which I didn't actually put in here, but that's another, it's later with auto-explain. So you can determine, okay, so 1,000 queries fall over this, I only want to log 10% of them, right? Just so I get a sampling of these queries that are going over some specific amount. Yeah, it's an easy win. I used to, if any of you know Craig Kirstein's from, he's with Crunchy, now Snowflake. I think for the last 7-8 years, at least once or twice a year, he's like, by the way, the easiest setting in the world to find slow statements is log min duration statement, right? I can't believe no one's turning this on. And so it's in milliseconds. And so it doesn't require a restart. It does require a reload, but not a restart. So that's another easy way to start to find stuff. What I would recommend, I often see this, the over, when it is turned on, I'll see people have it really low. So often we kind of set this randomly out as like he set it to a second. That's hard. I think if you have PG stat statements installed, I have another example later of maybe some ways to think about how to set that first go. And this is the thing about monitoring as you're looking for all of these queries that could be slow, is you're looking for a starting point that's reasonable. And then it is a job that you have to come back to at least, I would say 2 to 3 times over the next 6 weeks. Because as it runs in your application, you're going to find you're either over indexing for this stuff, quote unquote, or you're under indexing for it, right? And I don't mean indexing as an indexes. You're just getting a lot more information than you really need. It's not actionable, or you're not finding anything. So there's something that you need to actually increase a little bit. Yeah. So anyone have any?
You know that I fundamentally disagree with this approach.
Okay. No, that's fine.
Not a secret, right? Okay. No, and we can talk after this.
So basically what I do with this, I actually only recognize 2 possible like values for log mean durations, either -1 or 0. Anything in between does not give you the complete picture. -1 is okay by default, because when you are not actively investigating, having something else just eats up the space on the disk and does nothing. And when you really want to see what's going on with this database, you need to turn full logging for at least like a couple of hours, because then you can load it to PGBadger and analyze it, and then get the actual picture, what is your distribution of the queries which are executed this or that, because most times, the things which are actually slowing system down, as you know very well, is not like some long queries which run once a day, right? But like this, avalanche of not so long queries.
Yep.
So unless you have it 0, you cannot tell. So that's my 2 cents.
It's a valid observation. So I guess I would say one of the things, and if anyone else has feedback, that's fine. What I hear you saying is, I'm not using other application, and so I'm going to use logs or something like PGBadger to get some of that time series kind of nature of how this is happening over time in that window, right? And so that is an approach for sure, and I understand that. Yeah, I work for a company that's a monitoring company, and I have been doing that for many years. And actually, way back when I was at Timescale, that is one of the problems with the tools that we have. They're all cumulative, right? PG stat statements is cumulative, things like that. And so if you don't use something like PGBadger or something else that is doing that sampling for you, it's a pain in the butt, right? To actually find point in time point in time references to when a query is working. So.
Sorry. You cannot really work with a non-process log. It's like a nightmare, because you cannot find anything.
With the
raw log, with raw Postgres log, it's just not a place to look for anything.
No,
right?
It's hard for sure.
It had to be processed.
Yep.
By some tools, there are plenty, not all the PGBadger.
Yeah, so it is funny. I actually considered, do I want this to become a PGBadger talk? And I decided not to. It really was a consideration, because one of the things that we're going to get into here is things like explain. Yeah.
Yes, I have a bit of a question here. So kind of on this front and in this conversation, it seems like one of, I guess, the considerations is that, of course, in some of these systems, we'll have long-running queries that we're going to do, let's say, once a day, maybe every couple of days, et cetera, right? But there's kind of a principle, at least in some of the systems that I've worked in, not in the database side, of a lot of our time is really being spent on the small queries or the small type of operations, right? So particularly with audio, some of the stuff that I would work on, it isn't like these large audio packets that are necessarily the issue, because we get them in so few, it's just not very common, right? But is there any, I guess, calculations or how would you, I guess, recommend looking at, because in even going, I guess, multidisciplinary in economics, there's an idea of when talking about fees, right? How a system and fees work, having fees on very large purchases is not as bad as when you have fees on very small purchases.
Right.
And so when you look at, I guess, these smaller queries in which a lot of this overhead and seeing this kind of accumulate is actually pretty bad on the system as a whole, because they are so much more cumulative over, let's say, larger timescales.
Absolutely.
What's kind of, I guess, the nature of how we want to analyze that? Because I feel like it's a very difficult problem in any type of system.
Yeah, you just opened up the door before I even got into the rest of this. You're right. And honestly,
you do not need to reply right away. You started it. You told me.
I
so
did.
It's
I did. I
okay
started.
to ask
Why in the world did I
questions
start with
again.
this setting? Oh my goodness. That was, tell you what, let me get through a couple more settings, because I think the reality of that is one of the other challenges when I start with that very first slide, that there's a lot and yet it's still really hard. And so I think that one of the ways that you need to be able to do it is you do need to see how some of this stuff works over time. And so whether you use an external tool, it doesn't matter. There are many of them. There are open source, there are paid versions. There are things like PG Badger, if you want to do it from that perspective to get an idea. But ultimately, we only have some tools like PG stat statements, which is our best way. And it now has, that's one thing I didn't update in this deck. In PG-17, I think it was at 48 or 52 columns. Like there's a lot of columns in PG stat statements now. We're adding more and more every time, right? I can now identify from PG stat statements, which I couldn't do in Postgres 14, but I can do it now. I can now identify things that are using temp specifically, right? And I can start to understand queries that are IO bound or memory bound rather than. So that's improving every time. Right. And so I think being able to get into those is a good thing. And we're going to talk about a couple of those things next. And so let's have this conversation a little bit. Sound good? All right. So anyway, we're going to move on from this. Like I said, for me, this becomes if you haven't done anything, I just like to say, hey, at least enable it, whether you set it to 0 so you get it all because you're going to try and get something. And that is the value of this. You don't have to do a restart, right? You can just do a reload that starts, you get it, and you move on. And then you can turn it off again. Okay. Oh, I thought I added this to auto-explain. This is actually, I've come up with a couple of different examples, and then I was playing with, I had an old one, so I was playing with, I think, both ChatGPT and Claude, like, hey, what do you think about this? Give me some ideas. I think this one ultimately was like, oh, I kind of like that, this from Claude. This is just saying, like, hey, we have a lot of PG stat statement data. If you've been logging it, it's cumulative. So this is not, this is a rudimentary kind of query saying, if I were to divide everything by the number of calls or using the mean execution, I can kind of get an idea, what my overall thresholds are. And so if most of my queries are executing in 10 milliseconds in this example, or 50 milliseconds or less, maybe I only care about starting to log things that are 100 milliseconds or more. And in this case, you would just have to modify that values query, once you kind of get an idea of where your stuff is at. If you want to hone in a little bit, I played with a weighted query. It's like, this gets really complicated. So use it as an example, play with it, do something else that might be a way to start to think about a reasonable level for catching those outliers, all right? Track IO timing. So again, often it is off by default, and it's off by default just like PG stat statements is off by default, as it were, right? You still have to install it. But the reason is it does add overhead. And the Postgres development group has said time and again, like, we're not going to force overhead on somebody, right? We might have a great new thing, but if it's pretty evident that it incurs overhead, we're going to make you make that choice. And so track IO timing is off by default. Now, it is helpful for distinguishing. So then if you turn this on, it fills in columns in things like PG stat statements and PG stat database. And so, and actually, I think even PG stat index and tables. Anyway, but it allows you to actually identify, is this query CPU bound or IO bound, right? So if the timings, if it's spending a lot of time reading from disk, right, that's where the time is being spent, then you can understand this is the IO bound operation, right? If it's slow, but it's not reading from disk, then there's something CPU it's churning through. And so you really can't identify that unless you do have it on. Again, it shows up and explain when you add buffers. So when you add buffers, it literally will show you an additional column of the amount of time that was spent reading from disk, if it's reading buffers from disk, all right? Yeah.
Is there like a CPU-based setting?
CPU-based setting.
It's like track IO timing, track CPU timing, track other something,
Then you ask questions. Mike, can you repeat?
Yep.
Because we are also.
Yes, I was just curious if there was like a kind of brother or sister statement, to track something else,
So,
track
really good.
CPU timing or track.
It's a really good question. We do have some new views, things like pgstat.io, that are helping to identify CPU timings of specific kinds of weights and operations. That is not specifically tied to this. When it comes to query execution, generally it is measuring the I/O timing of read operations. And so it's kind of the positive negative, right? If it is there, you can understand that there's time being spent waiting on reading stuff. If it's not there, then it's the corollary, but then it must be a CPU bound operation in some way. So that specifically is not here. There are other methods. And then there's some extensions that try and get to that level. I have not used it in a long time, and I keep saying I should get that set up again. PGStat Kcache is another one that can actually help tie queries to tables and actual I/O information that's happening on disk and CPU information, CPU operation cycles. Again, unfortunately not here. And the reason I don't talk about that much is no hosted provider that I know of actually supports PGStat Kcache. Just because of what it entails and what it needs. It was really neat to play with a couple years ago, but I just haven't in a long time. Good question though. Having this on, so all this to say is, basically, hey, if there are lower values of CPU bound, if there is actual higher read I/O operations, then timings, then it means that there's generally an I/O bound kind of query. We've talked about internally at pganalyze. I've talked about this in years past. There's been a number of people that have done like experiments. And for most people, generally we find that it's usually 5% or less. And kind of like, so we recently, pganalyze released open source pgstat plans, which is an additional thing like pgstat statements that will allow you from Postgres 8.16 forward to be able to track individual plan shapes and IDs. And again, we care a lot about how much overheads that can add. And so usually we find that it's 1% to 2%, even with track timing in most workloads. The recommendation is turn it on with proper monitoring. That's just like, hey, just go for it, see what happens. Or if you hopefully have a really good staging environment, test it there. I actually should have listed on this slide. When you go to look at this in documentation, track timing, there is actually a tool that you can use to test how much the clock that it has to read for every operation, how much your specific system is impacted by that. And you can get a better idea of how much load this might add if you turn it on in your system, right? I would say most of our customers eventually lean towards turning this on. I will tell you that we serve lots and lots and lots of data and queries with our hosted environment, and we have it turned on in our database because we need the value from it, and we don't see the impact that it matters to us. That's just one point among many to try and think about it. Again, I threw this in here because I was going through some settings, and as I said, I've recently had to look at some other monitoring solutions, and I was surprised that at least two of them, when you go to find a statement text, they are actually, and there's a reason for it, I know why they're doing it, but they're actually only pulling the text out of pgstat activity. So pgstat activity is the right now real-time view of what's happening per process. Right, so it's a really fast, easy way to get, whether you have 100 active processes or 1,000 or whatever, these are the processes that are happening right now. And if they were executing something, it will have the statement text. But it will only have that much of the text before it gets truncated. And so there are numerous times where you have a really nice complex query and you have a bunch of them that are similar and you can't find the example you want because it just got truncated halfway through the query. So this is mostly I kind of threw this in here because I think people don't even know it really exists. I mean, think about it, right? It does incur a memory thing because basically Postgres is going to reserve memory for every process to be able to store the text, blah, 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 blah. But some of you are using some of these monitoring solutions and you're probably trying to use them for Postgres and you don't realize this. So I thought, I'm just going to throw it in a slide so people can say, I've never heard of that. I'm going to go see if it really matters to me. And you can go do that. And again, if your tool is pulling the full statement text out of pgstat statements, no worries, you're good to go. And you probably don't need to worry about the other thing. All right, then I see people don't have pgstat statements installed and they are shocked that they don't have it installed. We are in 2026 now. I have been back to using Postgres now for 8.5, almost 9 years. And I've been taught, I mean, I learned this 3 months in to coming back to Postgres because I couldn't figure out what was going on with my server. It's not that people don't know that it exists, so they don't understand that it's not installed. I think it really has become this thing everybody talks about, and we don't realize it's still not a default part of your database. You still, even in RDS, if you go to any of your monitoring solutions, step 1 is going to be go update shared preload shared libraries, all right? And add pgstat statements, probably comma auto explain, probably comma pgcron, you know, whatever your extensions are. And the problem is it requires an actual restart. And so if this is your production system and you didn't set it up earlier, now you got to wait for a maintenance window before you can start to use this. And that's really frustrating, right? So get in the habit now of making sure that this is enabled, that you've actually installed it in a database, and you can use it. So yeah, most people are really surprised that it's not enabled by default. Again, it is cumulative values, meaning if you query it right now, it's not super helpful, to be honest with you, because you have no idea if the top slowest query or the query that's been executed 1 million times was executed 1 million times in the last hour or 1 million times since the server's been running. You just have no way of knowing that, right? You just have raw numbers. So you need to have a solution. You really, at this point in Postgres life history, must have a solution that understands how to query pgstat statements at some regular interval to do those deltas for you, because then you can actually say, in this hour, what queries ran? You can start to actually get that information, even if you don't have all the logging. There are many. Yes, I have worked for 2 of those companies now, Redgate and pganalyze. There are plenty of others. There are many open source options, but you really, really, really need to find a tool that's doing that. If you're using Azure, if you're using RDS, if you're using Google, they all have something built in that does part of this. Absolutely. All of them at this point don't give you access to everything because, quite honestly, that's not their primary goal in life, is to give the most perfect monitoring solution. Okay, make it happen. pgstat statements max. So a lot of people don't really understand this, and so I'm shocked when I log in sometimes and I see people that are fairly new and they have this set really high. So by default, it is 5,000. And what this means is, so the way the pgstat statement works is all databases on your server, on that instance, are being tracked by pgstat statements, and all the query texts across all the databases are going into this cache of statements. And by default, Postgres pgstat statements will track 5,000. That's the default setting. So and they're unique, right? So unique query texts. So if you end up with 5,001, one of those has to get removed to make room for the new query. If you have 100 databases on a server and they're all doing really unique individual specific queries, you run out of 5,000 really quickly. And so you sometimes do need to raise this so that you get more value out of pgstat statements. But oftentimes, most people can probably work in a 10,000 range in a lot of cases and be okay. And otherwise, you can just churn a lot of time and space. These are actually stored on disk in a text file, and that just has all kinds of other issues going on. PG18 and below, there's some work hopefully being done in PG19 that might do some of this in memory, so this becomes a little bit easier to deal with. Yeah.
What is the difference between pgstat statements and pgstat activity?
Oh, great. The question is, what's the difference between pgstat activity and pgstat statements? 2 different views in Postgres. pgstat activity is a real-time view right now of the processes that are running and what they're doing. What are their weights? So what is it waiting on? What kind of process is it? Is it a query process? Is it a maintenance process? What user, what database, all that information. So that is the server's on fire at this moment. You can go see, oh, that process has been running for 5 minutes. What is the query text that it's running? That's awesome. But 2 hours from now, you have it doesn't matter, right? 2 hours from now, you have no idea what happened now.
As soon as the query's gone.
It's gone, right? pgstat statements is just tracking all occurrences of that statement over time until the servers, and some of that's changed recently, until the servers restarted or you reset them. There are other ways, but so it's just cumulative. So if you have run a statement 100 times, it will say call it 100 times. Here's the mean execution time. Again, there's like 50 different columns of information there. How many buffers are read? How many pages did it thing? What is the deviation of the query execution? Things like that. Yeah, so really helpful. Good question. The only other thing I'll say is this. We see this often. What most people, so Postgres 18 actually finally fixed this, which is cool. So many ORMs, it is primarily an ORM issue. And I know Hetty loves ORMs. She thinks they are the best things since sliced bread. If she could do one thing in her life, she would create a new ORM. But you did in Postgres, I know. It is called no ORM, I know. Norm. Most ORMs, when you do like a, give me, here's 5 IDs and give me the results for those IDs, it would do an in query. Well, that gets parameterized from most of our tooling anymore. So you end up with a query text that has 5 quote unquote question marks, as it were, and those become unique statements. So if you have one query with 2 values, one query with 5 values, one query with 10 values, they're all the exact same query. You get 3 queries in pgstat statements. And that's when you end up having to raise this thing to 20, 30, 40, 50. Now, Postgres 18 and above will take that in clause, and before it executes it, it rewrites it to be an any clause. You'll get the exact same query plan, right? It just makes it any. So if you could do anything, we encourage people, try and see if you can get your tooling to do an any query instead. And then you just get the same thing over and over and over again. You reduce and everything's good. Give it a look. All right, recommendation, I think I mostly said, obviously enable it. We generally tell people to raise it to 10,000. In a lot of modern workloads, people are trying to use multiple databases per server. Start there, see what that looks like. There is a dealloc column in pgstat statements info, and that is what you can look at over time to say, how often has pgstat statements had to kick a query out of its memory, as it were, out of that 5,000 or 10,000 to make room for a new unique text? Okay, so if that value keeps going up pretty quickly, it means that your statement text max is not enough, or you need to spread your load across multiple instances. You have too many databases, too many unique queries, whatever.
We'll be able to tell because the table will be nearly or will be 100% full.
It will be.
That's always a sign that it's expiring.
Yeah, so you can, so it is a view. pgstat statements is a view. You can do a count. You can do, the comment was you can tell based on how many values are in there. If there's close to 5,000 or 10,000, then you know that it's getting a lot of activity. Okay, you gonna get the, okay. He wants to be heard.
Yeah. So with this table, is there any information that we can get about the actual usage of those kicked off queries? For example, if we're talking about it's only unique query text, right?
Correct.
And so there are certain queries that maybe it's like a one-off or something that's being run like maybe, once a year type of thing. So
yeah, it's a good
can we
question.
get those type of statistics?
No, we do not track and again, unless you are using a tool that is tracking those over time and saving those, then no, if you query it right now, there's nothing that tells you what query was in there previously, but it's not there. So here's how this shows up for us. I don't know how other tools do it. Well, no, that's not true. I know how Reggae does it too. But in PG Analyze, because querying the statement text is actually pretty expensive, it's a text file on disk, right? And if you have 20, 30, 50,000 individual texts, we're asking Postgres to process that text file, and we are then trying to process 50,000 statements and so forth. So we only do it every 10 minutes right now. And so what can happen is if you have a really busy server, let's say that's at 5,000, and you're getting 10,000 unique queries every 10 minutes, then we're sampling pgstat statements every few seconds. And we say, hey, there's the query. We know the query because it has a unique hash. And then we go and get the actual statement text every 10 minutes, and we get all the hashes for the statement text. We're like, we have hashes for all these metrics we've been keeping for the last 10 minutes, but now we don't have a statement text that matches that hash, right? Because things have been kicked out over time, and we have no control over that. That's just Postgres. And so you will often end up with, well, we have a bunch of metrics for text that we don't have. It's like this nebulous bucket of information that we can't identify right now. And so that happens in a lot of other tools as well. Auto explain, I just want to move on to keep going here. Again, this for me, ultimately, all the other stuff is about getting, information that you can start to query. But now once you get down to, we can kind of tune, we're starting to understand and find problematic queries. We understand there's these views to do it. We get them enabled. We set some of those settings. We can't actually figure out what went wrong or why the query is slow unless we have the explain plan. And the only way to do that, right now at least, in Postgres 18 and below, is to have auto-explain. Again, a lot of folks, I think it coming from other databases, there's this expectation that just works, and it doesn't. So the only way for you to say that query that ran and it took 3 minutes, and I don't know why it took 3 minutes, and my customer is really upset. If you don't have auto-explain turned on, you'll never know why that took 3 minutes. You could try and rerun it right now, but you won't be able to likely get the exact same result.
Here, quick question, and I seriously do not know. It will only record the plan though if the query finished, correct? Actually, when something is hanging, and we do not know what's like rolling, and we have to kill it because it stops everybody else, then unfortunately we still do not know. And I think that's coming.
It's great, right? Yeah. Exactly. Perfect. Yes. All of these things, PGStat statements, auto-explain, even log statement, they only do their job if the query finished, right? If a query didn't finish, it won't show up. Even if it was abort, right? Like if it hit the statement timeout, like of 30 seconds, that call of that query will not be in PGStat statements because from Postgres' perspective, it never finished. We're not going to add that into.
Never happened.
It never happened.
Whatever is not on the Instagram, it never happened. So that was not
exactly. However, to your point, and I didn't put that in here, but maybe I did in the next slide. Yes, that is coming. So Postgres 18, and there's work being done in Postgres 19. There's been a long standing request from the community for years. I have a query that's hanging right now. The plan happened. It was the first thing Postgres did. Why can't you show me the plan that you're working on? And so that's finally will come, I believe, in Postgres 19. PGStat plan, which we have released open source, and there are bindings in Postgres 18 for this. You can see the explain plan of the currently running query. If you have Postgres 18 with PGStat plan, no one is supporting that specifically right now. Now, Aurora, at least AWS, and I do know that Azure is doing something similar, so I assume that Google's doing it as well on Alloy. They all have something similar to that. So PGStat plan is the open source version, unrelated but similar to something that Aurora and AWS is doing. So if you enable Aurora Compute Plan ID, it will track unique plans per query. So same query gets different plans, different ways to get the data. Some might execute really fast, some might execute slowly, and that's valuable information. And so part of that then, Sammy's not here tonight. I was going to actually ask him if he knew, because Sammy actually helped with PGStat plans. I think the follow on from this then will be like in Aurora, you could do something similar. What is this current process? What is the plan for the process that's running right now? Anyway, so auto-explain, I would say at this point, if you were running a production environment, doesn't matter where it is. This is built into Postgres, but it has to be enabled. And it's preload shared libraries. You have to enable it there. So it requires a restart. But once it's there, you have to tune it. You have to set it up. And this logs the query plan. Then you need to get the query plan out. We'll talk about that in a minute. But at least you now have the plan for the query that completed. All right, question? And I'm happy to repeat it if whatever you can. Here she comes.
You've said it multiple times, right? And this is kind of the old kind of C++ motto, right? It's like, don't pay for things you don't need, right? Mm-hmm. So all these things are built in. Is there somewhere perhaps in the docs or other places, like a, best by defaults of what you should do?
Oh, would that be amazing? Honestly, no, not in the docs. The best I would say that we have right now maybe is the one wiki page that says, don't do this, right? Like do this, don't that, or I forget what the page is called. Has nothing to do with most of these things. There are just some things that have come around.
That's why we're here, that's why we're here.
That's why we're
here.
I would say this, the one thing that's interesting is I've seen conversation, I've been a part of a few of them over the years. So when I was at Timescale, because it's its own unique module, they did years ago for Timescale, they created just a little Go application that would look at your, basically, and it's still in the docs, I think. If you set up Timescale, you run Timescale dbTune, I think is the name of the app. And it basically says, hey, here's your settings, here's your server size, CPU, this and that. Here's recommended tunings for this. And I'm like, that's a really good idea. Like there's some good recommendations. Why not do that? Now, Aurora, all those places, they have like built-in formulas for a lot of these things, but not the stuff that you need to enable. Like auto explain just isn't turned on. It's still manual. There's no way to be like, you still have to go create your own parameter group and set it up. That's just annoying. It's a great question. Let's make that our first contribution to docs. Let's do it. That'd be great. That'd be amazing. It'd be good.
But then how many companies make money on this?
I know,
Because they
right?
tune, right?
Yes.
That's the reason.
It is one of the reasons. I agree. All right. So yes, it's impossible to answer why unless you have this. If you want to look this up, again, Lucas has talked about PG stat plans. There's a webinar about it. And really, this is open source. We're really hoping we use this internally for hashing the plans and getting individual plan IDs. But really, the goal is that this becomes something that anyone has access to. And maybe someday it becomes a contrib module or something. And likewise, I'm not going to go through this whole thing again, but same deal. It won't log statements unless they go above this minimum. Now, again, absolutely do not want to set this to 0. And I don't, Hetty would agree with me on that one. These are explain plans, right? If you set that to 0, every single query, the same 1 millisecond query is going to log an explain statement in your logs, and your logs are going to go boom. And there's no value in tuning the 1 millisecond query, right?
Absolutely. I would never recommend that for auto explain.
Totally different thing.
Yeah,
From
absolutely.
the purpose of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yep.
Imagine somebody does not do partition pruning. Ooh.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Disk space is full.
Very good point. So this is where I thought I'd put that query here. So I apologize. That might be a good place for that query of finding like a good first step. The goal of auto explain from my perspective is always when something really doesn't perform well and you know what that is. Like what are all the, there's all the studies that say when a web page takes 300 milliseconds or longer to load, people are gone, right? So maybe that's your threshold. If a query doesn't return in 250 or 300 milliseconds, and I think it should, I want to know what happened. Can I make it better? This is the only way for you to do it. And what you'll get with it is the parameters and other stuff too. Like, so you'll actually be able to see that plan with those parameters, what happened, right? And could it be changed and modified? Yeah, I guess I did say at the end, set up, maybe use PG stat statements as a way to find that floor. So here's what I would say. If you're using Aurora, how many people are using Aurora? Anybody? Oh, okay, at least one. Good. I honestly, there's been a huge uptick, I would say, my perspective in our customers. I'm actually shocked. Like more and more people are edging towards Aurora than RDS, which has been a little bit of a surprise for me. Pros and cons, whatever. But if you do have Aurora, please turn that on. They are providing some tooling. We actually provide tooling for it. I think there's at least one other monitoring software that's doing the same thing now. And what that allows you to do is see for this query if there are multiple plan shapes, right? This query was fast. Oops, it got really slow. Well, what do you know? There's a new plan shape. Something changed in what Postgres thought would be fast to go get that data, and it turns out it wasn't. And being able to identify those things are good. Baseline settings. This is what we tell customers, and quite honestly, every time I go over this, I agree with, for the most part, all of it. Log timing, yes, it adds overhead. And so if you really don't have this tuned well, then you're going to have to do a lot of timings on the explains here, and that is going to slow things down. So I sometimes probably would turn it on personally, but it just depends on your workload. What you then get is a plan you can really do something with. You can pull it out. You can put it in all kinds of tools, lots of open source tools to see this thing. And the last 2 or 3 things, and then we'll be done. Log statement all. I still see this sometimes. Please don't. Like, just don't. but I'm shocked. There's been 3 times in the last couple months. I'm like, whoa, what? Don't do that. I think there is some valid value to maybe if you don't have other things set up. I don't know. Like I could see some value in setting DDL, and that would basically say anytime you do like a create statement or an alter statement, something like that, it will log it. Maybe there's value. Quite honestly, if you're doing that, you probably want PG audit. So most of the time, just make sure this is set to none. Log duration, people have this set on. Again, depends on your tooling, what you're looking at. I would most of the time say probably not.
That's it has different things of login duration. Actually, this should not be on. Because it doesn't help.
Literally every single statement is going to print a duration for a statement, but it's an individual log line. It's thank you. I don't have any other information to help me.
That's completely useless. Yeah.
But the problem is I see people with it on. So, and then last but not least, I think is PG audit, as I've said. If you are using this, is anyone using this in financial and other? Yeah. You can tune it. And I think a lot of folks don't know that. Your requirements might be just everything so that it is what it is. Like you're going to end up with billions of logs every day and whatever. Like I get that. But that means it's really hard to find other stuff too, right? There's just so much volume. And so there are ways to tune it to specific object types or maybe just specific kinds of operations, which is what you actually really need to know when schema has been modified, things like that. So maybe that's something to go look at. I just think a lot of people don't know. They say enable it and like, good to go, move on. So think about that. Super quickly, just because this was also part of this call, and I just want to quickly throw this out there because I was shocked by it. And these actually do have a little bit of a point in tuning. I just want to throw this out because I'm going to show you 2 examples here. So one is auto vacuum scale factor. By default, it is 20%, so 0.2. I was on a call recently where someone had it set to 0.01 globally. And I was like, why are you doing that? It was crazy. So don't pre-do this stuff. I think that's what was shocking. I see this over and over again with folks that are just changing it as they read a blog post somewhere. Like, oh, well, if I should lower it, I'll just lower it everywhere and make it run really fast. And that's great.
What does the scale factor mean?
Yeah, scale factor is, so there's auto vacuum scale factor. There's auto vacuum analyze scale factor. It's for the number of rows in the database, what percentage of those rows have to be modified before auto vacuum kicks in. And so auto vacuum is what reduces bloat and does some other stuff. Auto vacuum analyze is what updates statistics. And so you tune it down to 1% and auto vacuum's running all day long on every table, on every database. And like, you're just way overdoing it, stealing resources. I could see some value in maybe lowering those globally if you have a really heavy database. In general, just do it specifically to the table, right? You can alter specific tables that are update heavy and so forth. Default statistics target. I've seen people just set this to 1,000 because they think more statistics are better. And that just means that there's a whole lot of work being done for probably very little return. I have seen some studies that say like, yeah, depending on your workload, maybe 200 actually is better than the default of 100. SQL Server actually has the default of 200. So yeah, whatever, it is what it is. There's no reason to make it really big just because that could be cool. There might be a table that it really does benefit. You have a lot of distribution and the planner can do a better job, but don't just go set this because it's there. And I'm still shocked how often I see that. And then I was talking to someone here today who's works with Hetty, who does stuff with a PG bouncer. Again, a lot of people say, well, I have a really active database. I'm going to set this to 5,000 or 10,000 because why not? Well, why not? Because it's a process for every one of those things. And you aren't logging anything, so you don't realize that 99% of them are inactive all the time anyway. So if you're doing logging, you set the slower and use a pooler in some way.
RDS does it by default, by the way.
What's that?
RDS does it by default.
Is it 1,000?
Yeah, it does like 1,000 at the minimum.
I didn't know that.
Now you know.
Thank you very much. I'll update this. I don't think that's great. All right.
I mean, no, it's like it does it too
Much. That's what I'm saying. It does
You think okay?
Yeah, other way around. No, it does it 1,000 because they do not care, because they can do this.
They can do it.
Yeah, and if the users do not know that it's not cool, then they just have it.
That's true.
It runs with 1,000.
Yeah.
But then you never have a run out of max connection.
Well, most of that, they never run out of it.
Yeah,
and they don't know that.
RDS do not fail you with out of memory, so they just make
They
you
just keep
slower,
making you do more.
slower, and then you're wondering why.
And the reason is, I mean, I think part of what he's saying is connections really matter to other things, right? It's for every connection, you have activity, you have things like memory then that gets taken, you have work mem that gets, there's this correlation between all these settings. And if you don't set them all, you aren't really paying attention to your workload, you end up in issues with performance. This doesn't work very well. And the last but not least is work mem. Again, mostly you get used to using the stuff you think that everyone knows about it. I think most people still don't really understand that this is settable, even though we talk about it often. So if nothing else, I just want to see all these settings. I'll make this thing available. And you go home and you look at your settings, figure out what you got, right? Work mem is essential to fast running queries. And I have seen in modern workloads, this is just anecdotal evidence. I don't have really hard evidence right now. But most of the time, the default's 4 meg. And if you are doing a sorting operation, as an example, that is something that needs to be done in memory. If there's not enough memory for the amount of data, it spills what we call spills to disk. It goes to a temporary table, and that's a slow operation. And unless you're getting explain plans or you're looking at PGStat statements correctly, it's a really hidden thing. And most of the time, in most workloads, there's this weird thing where with our architectures, what have you, I see a lot of people, if you just set it to 8, 16 megabyte range, you have 16 or 32 gigs of RAM anyway, you're probably going to be okay. Most of the time, your query, like a problematic query, just becomes faster because it turns out you had no idea. You just needed 8 or 9 megs of RAM for that sort operation to happen consistently and never had it. And suddenly your query is faster. It's anecdotal, but I'm shocked how often I'll actually find a query, have someone run the explain plan and be like, you just needed 2 more megs and that thing would have been a whole lot faster. Okay. So I'm going to show you how to do that next with a couple query examples. Does that sound good?
Question.
Yeah.
Here. With this recommendation here, this is, I guess, maybe a bit in the weeds, but what would be technically faster in this case? Would it be Postgres' own management of the swapping from memory to disk, or would swap be faster?
Oh, I think it's a different conversation. So
yeah. And I guess in context to say, if you like did a massive swap and then just like raise this value up to, a crazy amount, like what are we?
So here's the deal. Mostly this is a conversation over the data is stored on disk, whatever that means. And are on disks, you get an NVMe and all that stuff. It's super fast. I get it. But there still is this architecture of the code is expecting things to be in a memory location, and you still have to exchange stuff out of that memory location, which is slower. There's actually a really good article by Letitia that I just found from like 2 years ago about the whole, essentially this, right? And it was specifically to NUMA, which is how you tie processes to this memory and all that stuff. But so there is an overhead. And so if you don't have enough shared buffers, and work mem has to, that's a different conversation, what we're really talking about here. Sorry, my brain. Ultimately, what you're asking about is a little bit different from this. It's just a function of how the query works. Every operation can use up to this much memory, up to this much amount of memory. If there are 2 sorts in your query, it could be 2 different sort processes, and both of them can use up to this amount, right? And so if both of them have to spill to disk, then and one relies on another, then one has to sort on disk, and then the next one has to sort, right? And so, again, this is all very anecdotal. I'm just shocked at how often I will look at plans with people and it's 2, 3 megabytes, because there's just something about our workloads that most of the time, it doesn't tend to be like, oh, that query is kind of slow, but I don't know why. It's this. Now, if it's 10 minutes, it's probably not this. That's a different discussion. Something to look at. Yeah.
Can you log when things spill?
So I'm going to talk about that right now. So here's an example of spilling to disk. All right. So in an explain plan, this is why logging explain plans with auto explain at whatever threshold is, this is one of the reasons why you need to be able to then use a tool or get really good with querying logs, right, through file FTW, log FTW, whatever your method might be, to find things like, or PG Badger. No, actually, no, PG Badger doesn't do explain plans, so it won't do it in this method. But anyway, this is what it looks like in an explain plan, right? External something. When it says this operation was done externally on disk, it tells you how much disk it needed to complete the operation. So essentially, this is work mem plus this is what was needed. Now, when you get parallel queries like this, then you have to take that into account a little bit. But essentially, we're saying, hey, this probably needed, I think on this example, I had 8 meg. So let's say roughly, if work mem would have been 48 or 50, something like that, this probably would have happened in memory, right? I'm not going to get super precise about it. I'll look at that and say, okay, round numbers, if I set that to 50, it's probably going to not go. And this is why it's helpful to know. If you look at, or secondarily, you can look at PGStat statements. So in PGStat statements, we have the temp blocks written, and that is blocks, 8 kilobyte page blocks being written to disk that couldn't be done in memory. And so we can do this calculation. Essentially, it says, hey, find queries where there's temp blocks written. And in round numbers, this example, there's that many blocks written, 8K. So here's the formula. I would have needed 250 work mem for all of that to happen in memory in that one example, right? And that's just because of the query, and it was something I created to loop a whole bunch of times and do stuff. So you can find these things. If you have a query that's always using temp, then you got to do something with it. And so basically what you can do is you can set work mem at runtime for that connection. So this is what I tell a lot of people. You start to find those queries, and you find the ones that are, work mem is pretty good until all of a sudden you start to see that you need 16 meg, you need 30 meg, right? You're like, okay, there's a couple of these queries that need a little bit more, but everything else is functioning fine at 8. Cool. That's my global work mem. And then I'll start to work on those other queries. And it could be as simple as this. Hey, it's a nightly job. And so every night that thing runs, I just set work mem for that connection, because it's not going to impact anybody else. I'll just let this thing run, 10 times faster and then move on. Or you could do something like this. Maybe you have that nightly role, and you can actually set work mem as a role value. It's something to consider. So just because of time, I'm not going to run a couple of these. I'll leave these in the slides, and then we can go there. Here's 2 other quick examples, which I actually have to go run for you. One is wrong index due to order by. This is something we see a lot that people don't recognize. Once you get the plans, you can actually look for the planner chooses the index based on the order by, not based on the filters. And so what it's doing is it's essentially getting all the rows to do the sort, and then it filters out based on the where. And so you look for things like an index scan and a primary key, a filter where you're pretty sure like I see an index being used, but it's not for my where clause. And honestly, the hack is particularly when it's IDs, you just add +0 to it, and it all of a sudden uses the correct index, and you're good to go. And then the last one is inefficient nested loop. Again, once you've logged all this stuff, you finally have some of these plans. You can find these by looking for things like subplans with high loop counts. The same table being scanned repeatedly. And this is where CTEs are actually a powerhouse in Postgres, because we can materialize them. And so now I can take that thing that's being scanned because it's inlined every time. I can memoize it, and then it just gets done once, and I've reduced my overhead by, in some cases, hundreds of times with a really quick and simple hack. So there's a lot of good questions. I love this back and forth. Hopefully there's a couple things in there. I will clean this up a little bit, and I'll make sure it gets up on my repo, which is, not listed here. I thought it was on this stick. It's easy. GitHub/Ryan Booz.
You will need to post it at the meetup. And actually,
And I'll
I
make sure I get it,
apologize.
yeah.
I cannot let you go because there is like one online question.
Yes. Okay. What's
From our
on?
friend Varun, actually. Yeah.
What's that?
From our friend Varun. Okay. Ryan, great talk. Question on behalf of folks new to Postgres with AI agents and always on tuning tools getting better every year. Do we still need to learn deep PostgreSQL tuning, memory naps, or vacuum internals, plan behavior, or is future more like AI watches everything and keeps things healthy?
Who was that? Yeah. Varun, come on, man. Okay, now I understand.
Just your first statement. Like, what is your first statement?
Varun logged in late. Here's the deal. I think Hetty would say the same thing. I have a really good relationship with the gentleman who runs DBTune. I think that what they're doing is really neat. I think they have some great, some really good stuff happening. I think the reality is, again, there's two problems currently with Postgres. The change is going to happen when you can modify some of these things and don't require a restart. When some of those things happen, maybe we'll be able to get a better feedback loop. There are a number of these settings that actually don't take effect and so they can't modify them. They'll give you the suggestion, but you still have to then, make sure that you have a window to do that. So that's part of it. And quite honestly, I think there's a baseline level that we can do better at, which will help those tools get to great faster. And I think if we don't, we spend a lot of time and effort. That's, In 5 years, this is a worthless talk, but who knows?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No, it's
You know?
well, because you need this to train the AI.
There you go. Hey, good point. I'll make sure it gets up there quickly so it can start going. It's good. With the career examples I didn't show you, but.
Yeah, no, honestly, so me being in this industry for who knows how many, okay? People do not live this long, okay? That's my 43rd year in database management, okay? So I know people don't live this long, but every 5 to 10 years, I hear that this profession will be gone because computers like models, AI, whoever will do it for us. So my experience being deep in the reality here is that, how I should put it nicely, because of AI, we will always have jobs because they are making database life miserable.
It's small stuff. So talk done. Here's just the last 3 days working with Claude in a simple example database that's not production. That's pretty simple. We're talking 25 tables, right? And maybe 2 dozen functions or whatever. I said, hey, this is an idea. Let's talk about this, go through this, and start to come up with things. And just simple stuff like, hey, let's write this function that resets stuff, and we're going to delete the table that has 30 million rows in it, and the other table that's connected that has 40 million rows. It's like, why did you do that rather than truncate? You just totally blew, that's not, just something simple like that, where you're creating overhead and workload that's actually not beneficial. If you don't know it, you're happy to just move on. Well, it got my end result. Who cares, right? It really matters. The other thing that I see with the AI stuff, we had this conversation at we're having pizza about, airlines and are we going to be on an airplane soon where there's no pilots, right? They hit a button because it can take off and land and everything. It's better than a human. I said, well, maybe in some circumstances, but in ours, the data, in most of our production things, humans are not predictable and most of our apps are being used by humans. And so there's always going to be that unpredictable spike in thing that the model itself can't completely accommodate for. And if you don't know how to do something about it, it's going to make an irrational decision of how to fix it, right? Because on a model perspective, well, it just makes sense. You should set this value to this over here. And if you don't understand your data and your usage, the use case right now, I don't think we have the nuance in settings to actually do that well right now. That's my experience. But.
Any more questions to Ryan? I mean, we can continue over there, but if anybody want to ask questions to benefit our Zoom participants who do not have pizza, any other question?
I guess at what point did you consider something that is nice to have versus a must? I feel like that's a thin line, and I know it's very personal preference, but...
Oh, interesting. Of the stuff we talked about?
For the ones that you included and maybe the ones that you didn't that were planning to include and kind of all those.
Oh, wow. I will simply say, and again, mostly because I don't know anyone's specific experience in this room. I think, sorry, it's a really good question. I think that auto explain is just a must have. I think that it's impossible. If you are, I'll say this, if you're a DBA or you are a database developer, that is part of your job, who cares about actually improving the application, even if you're doing it through an ORM, right? You will not understand the impact your ORM is having on your database in real time unless you're doing auto explain. And it's so easy to say, that's not that big of a deal. And I think Hetty would totally agree. Like, you cannot understand it until you can see it. And so having a tool that can visualize it for you, whatever that is, again, I worked for one of them. There are plenty of others. But until you can like easily see that impact, I think it's really hard. So that's above everything. That's one that I think we just have to understand how to use it better and get used to it, because it's going to improve what you do.
Right.
PG stat statement second
Any-
and learn how to
any
query
more?
it and all the stuff.
Any more questions?
In terms of I/O utilization, is there any differentiation between the physical I/O as opposed to logical I/O, much like a SQL server?
Ooh. Wow, good question. There is. And so, right, like when it comes to query execution, it's funny, I don't think about it in physical and logical at this point. We're talking in explain plan terms. It's hit and read, right? So hit value is generally faster. So again, you don't know unless you have explain plans. And so being able to see the explain plans and understanding through that, through PG stat statements, you can tell how often a query needed information from disk versus how much of it was in memory logically to actually go get. And so if you have queries that are always going out to disk, that in and of itself is a really good opportunity for understanding why that is, right? And so in explain plan terms, which is a totally different talk, it's hit. So when you have buffers that are hit, it means they were in the cache. It hit the cache. Buffers that were read for that part of the plan, it had to go out to disk to get them in some way.
Right. Anything else?
It'd be really interesting to go look, and just so you guys know, like, again, this sounds like, no, don't get me wrong, company does pay for me to come do this. So, but I like seeing this view. So other tools have this. I will so often go into a customer's thing. It's like all the yellow is something that's different. If you can find, there are plenty of tools to do this, and you'll be shocked sometimes. So you'll go down through on like an Amazon server, they have formulas. You're like, what? That's my shared memory size right now? I had no idea that's what that is. I didn't know that someone turned on log statement. What? That's really there. So find something that can show you what it default was and what yours is currently set to. I think you'll be shocked if you go look at some of these things. So figure it out. Cool.
Thank you. So before we head to pizza, like one short announcement. So remember, I mentioned we have community partners for the conference. So I just want to introduce one more time. So we have at the moment 2 community sponsors is Chicago Python, and Carlos is like the guy, and Chicago Cotton Coffee, and Chicago Cotton Coffee, and Jonathan. So those are 2 groups which we are partnering, and we try to advertise their meetups, and they try to advertise ours. So they are our friends. Please consider attending both of them. Okay.
Awesome. Great.
All right.
Yeah, we'll see you guys here in June at the very least. So
yeah. All right. So please take your things back to the cafeteria, and we still have like about an hour until I will have to kick you out. Okay.
thanks, everybody. You're welcome. You're welcome.
One, I was like,
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Remember the good old days?
Yeah, I'm about to claim my first.
I'll tell you about that.